Thank you for coming tonight. I'm going to talk about logging in Benzie County. And if we do talk about logging in Benzie County, we first have to talk about William and Edith Overlease and their work with an oral history project. Some of the guys were as old as 100 when they were interviewed for this, and we collected those interviews into a book at Daylight in the Swamp. I'm going to start here. So I don't believe this is a common scene for the men who worked in the woods. There's a man sleeping against this stump here. And as always, I'd like to point out that there is a dog in the foreground. And these guys are putting logs onto a flat car. So there were two ways of logs getting to the mill. The first one that was used was the Benzie River primarily. And they would put logs in the river, they would raise the level of Green Lake near Interlaken, and then they would flush the logs down to Frankfort and Benzie Bay. They did that because the Benzie River is a slow river and it needed an extra push to get through. That worked for the pine. When they started cutting the hardwood, they had to go to building railroads. And the first railroad in the county, standard gauge, was the Frankfort and Southeastern Railroad. And the guys who invested in that were the mill owners in Frankfort. And this is a view of Alberta, 1883. On the left side, you can see an early bridge that crossed the Benzie River between Frankfort and Alberta. And you can also, the white building near the center is the school, which was built in 1870. Looking at Benzie Bay, you can see a number of sticks poking out of the water. These were pilings that men who represented each mill would stand on, and as the logs were flushed down the river, they would look at the log mark and sort the logs into booms to go to each respective mill. The two mills in this picture, on the left is the Crane Lumber Mill, and on the right is the Banks Mill or the Frankfort Lumber Company Mill. This is a view of the docks of the Crane Mill. On the left, you can see two men standing on piles of lumber that has been sawn and is waiting for shipment. And this is probably pine that it's going to Milwaukee or Racine, because that's where he did business. On the right, there's the Banks Mill there, and that's located where the cabbage shed is located now. So if you actually sit outside and have a nice meal at the cabbage shed and you look in Benzie Bay, you can see pilings, and that's from the Crane Mill. Again, the school is in there on the left-hand side. So they were very effective at cutting all the trees in Benzie County. There are no original trees left in Benzie County. There's no virgin forest in Michigan except for up in the Porcupine Mountains. There were some in Interlaken, but they blew down in the weather. And there were some in Grayling, but they had disease. And that's just because you need a robust population to endure those kinds of things. So if you get them too small, they can't overcome those obstacles. Nope. Because it's not just the trees being old, it's the whole biosphere around it. So these trees, this is looking east in Frankfort, about 8th Street. That's where the tree line is. And this is in 1872. This is looking the opposite way from where the Marine Gateway is now at the top of 115 there. And you can see the stumps. So in 20 years, they cut all those trees down. Those trees were hardwood because near the shore of Lake Michigan, it was really swampy and there's not a lot of pine trees in the swamp. So they used these hardwoods to fuel the Frankfort Iron Works, which is located in Alberta. And they used the fuel, and then once they cut all the trees, they moved somewhere else. Here's a map, and all these arrows are pointing to where there were lumber mills or activity as such. Now, lumber camps where they cut down the trees, they moved around quite a bit. but you can see that they're located near the rail lines, which are the darker lines there. This doesn't seem to be a typical view of what it looks like to work in the woods. These two gentlemen, they're twins. They are Reuben and Ruford DeLong. They're Benzie County boys. And I think they were out of 9 boys. So they had a lot in that family. The interesting thing in this image is that they're using oxen. Oxen were considered more sure-footed than horses, so they were preferred in the woods. Once you got on a road, then they would use the horses. The trees appear to be beech. They're quite big, looking at the size of the one right next to the guy standing there with the cant hook. This was just outside Honor. Here's another view, and you can see the logs that have been felled. You can see how dense it is in the background. And the nice thing about scanning images now is that you can zoom in, and you can just see that these men were in the background within all this woods. So they're right to the right of the center of the. This is the log decks in Honor for the Guelph Pet and Cast Company. Taking the logs next to the river so that they can then be transported to the mill. On the way to the mill, the logs were stamped with a log stamp. These 3 are just examples of what they would use. Sometimes it would be Circle C for Crane, the double B for the Bellows brothers, or the square X for Butler. And they had multiple ones, and they could trade and sell these to other lumbermen. So these were the marks they would be looking on when they were at the sorting gap. Here's a winter scene, and in the upper right, you can see a man standing on top of the log deck there. This is a log deck on Pearl Lake outside of Lake Ann. You can see they're using oxen again. And you can see the men who are standing on the logs in the water. One's using a cant hook, and the other one has a peavey. A peavey is a cant hook with a point at the end. And the river drivers use that, or men in water, to help move the logs along. No, I think they took it over to Lake Ann. Oh, if they worked on the river? Oh, yeah. Yep. I'm going to ask that we take questions at the end because I can talk forever. So I want to finish before it gets dark. So this is a winter scene, and a lot of the logging images are winter scenes because it was easier to transport the logs on a sled than with a wagon and wheels. That was true until they created a thing called the big wheels, which were 10 to 12 feet in diameter, and that could help you log year round in the woods. And to make it easier to go down these roads, they actually had men who would ice it. So they would get this wagon full of water and then slick it up so that when the logs went over it, they could move much easier. This is Lake Ann. Again, you see some peaveys in here. You also see a tug in the background. Tugs were used on these bodies of water because they would bank the logs on the shore, and then it was much easier to take it over the water in a boom or a collection of logs instead of over the mud. Here's an example of the big wheels. So they slung it underneath the axle, and they could pull about 5 or 6, depending on the size of the logs. One of the men who was interviewed by the Overleases is in this image. If you look at the left wheel of the big wheels, the man at the lowest there above the stick there, that's Ralph Hooker. And this is a group of men, teams, pairs of horses were called teams, and they were used by the lumbermen, but they would hire not just the guy who would operate the horses, they would hire the horses as well, meaning that if you had two horses on your farm and you used them during the summer, you would also use them in the winter and get paid a little bit more and get your horses fed during the winter. Um, this image is interesting because if you look at the guy standing up holding the two horses, that's Ron Skinner Sid Skinner, and on the left is Ron Skinner. And the Skinner family is a family of African American men that worked in the woods. Here are two men using a cross saw. The guys, when they ate, they would consume like 3,000 to 4,000 calories to work in the woods. So they had one big meal, which was breakfast. Then they would have a snack brought out to them, and then they would have dinner. But breakfast was the big deal. And when they did these interviews, they recorded them. And the zeal these men had for talking about their breakfast was fantastic. This is a brag load. I don't believe this was pulled by the horses. They had brag loads to show how high they could pile them up. In this county, in honor, they had a telegraph wire going across the road, and if your load would hit that, you'd get a free outfit from one of the stores. In the bottom left of this image, it says Sharp. This is significant because he's a photographer that took pictures throughout the area, and he has a nice eye. Here's a brag load that is more reasonable. These are hardwood logs. It sure is. I feel bad for the horses, though. Here's another one. This is from Burt Cook. Thing about these old pictures of Benzie County, guys love to sit on a bunch of things. If it was a load of logs, they'd sit on it. If it was a train wreck, they would sit on it. If it was the ruins of a burned building, they would sit on it. They had no fear. The numbers they write on the end of the logs is the square feet for the whole sled. The guy on the right has this magnificent fur coat on. So they didn't just cut logs in the wood. There are other products too. And one of the major things was hemlock bark. So they would peel the bark from the hemlock tree. They would cut it into squares, and then they would ship it off. And then it would go to a tannery. So it was used in tanning hides. And if you look at the sled, there's a bar on the top, and that compresses the squares of hemlock bark. And the wagon on the right, that doesn't have hemlock, that has cordwood, which is 4 feet long and about 6 to 8 inches in diameter. And that's what they used in the charcoal kilns. So there's a lot of cutting of that in the woods as well. The guy on the left, he's using a spud to pry the bark off the tree. Here's another view. And a couple of the men in this image are of Native American descent. They were known for working in the woods. Actually, in honor, there was a Bailey family. The Bailey family was of Native American descent, and they worked in the woods. This is loads of tan bark ready to ship out. And here's the Betsy River. In the background, you can see Lewis Bridge. You can see the men with their PVs standing on the logs. And yes, they did wear boots with spikes on them. When we have an example of that in our exhibit. You can see the actual length of the spikes. This man here is Jack Osborne, and he ran the river drives on the Platte River. There was another man who ran it on the Betsy River, and the lumbermen would work together because they would have to maximize their use of the workers pushing everything down the river. You could only flood the river once, so you wanted to make sure everybody was working at the same time. That's the Lewis Bridge again in the background. Oh, so that's on River Road. So on River Road between, where the trailhead for the Betsy Valley Trail is. So the men who worked on the river, they would sleep at various places. They had camps and houses that would house them each year. But on the river itself, they had a base of operations called the Wanigan, where their meals were prepared and everything like that. This is an image of an example of a Wanigan. Pretty much. And you can see how the bravado of the river drivers. They were known for being very flashy and eccentric people. To have this job was very dangerous. If you fell and you got stuck between the logs, that was not good. If you had a log roll down the bank of the river and hit you, that was not good as well. So you had to take risks, and their attitudes showed that they were up to it. This is Lewis Bridge again. No, there's a footing there, and there's some pictures at the Betsy Valley Trail put up recently. I don't see a bridge in this one. Here we go. But most of the men who worked in the woods worked in logging camps. The logging camps had various amenities. They had a guy who would take care of your horses for you. They had a cook. Now, if they didn't like the cook, they would strike until they got a new cook. So that's an early form of labor movement. And then they would have a laundry as well. And there wasn't a whole lot of entertainment. Some guys who ran the camp boss, allowed cards, or they would have preachers come and talk to them. And it was a rough life because they wanted you to work all the time because they only had a short period of time. Cut the log for winter to transport them. And you can see the buildings they have here. You can see the size of the logs that are part of the structure. And you can see the tar paper roofs with the boards holding it down. You can see that there's a woman, and then there's a boy there who works various odd jobs for them. Here's another example. This is out of Weldon Township. This was a job that not only the farm workers would use to supplement their farm income. A lot of immigrants were brought over, particularly Lewis Sands out of Manistee would hire a bunch of immigrants and bring them over here. You can see in their dress how it's varied, particularly their hats. In the background, you can see a cutter with a family on it. That's probably the guy that runs the camp. Here's another camp. This is a large building. You can see the big wheels. You can see the men standing on the big wheels because what else are you going to do? And you can see the oxen. This one is pretty clean. The insides weren't as clean. Your men are playing cards. Your wet laundry you would hang up. It probably smelled wonderful in there. And there was, if you were close to where the furnace was, they had a big boiler or a big furnace there. and that was the place to be, and you could hang your socks on it. Here's another image. This one's later 1909, and this is Stormer's Camp, and this place was also called Peterville. It was on the Empire and Southeastern Railroad. It's in Platte Township. Roughly. Here's a whole bunch of brag loads. And these are the log decks in Honor during the winter. So Honor used a whole bunch of hardwood, maple primarily, and then they would make a veneer. So they would peel it around and then get a very thin layer. A lot of trees met their end in Honor. Honor, by the way, is named after the daughter, the superintendent of the Gulf Pet and Cast Company in Honor, and it was Honor Gifford. More logs. Men are standing on it, in case you want an idea of scale. There's a mess of logs on the other side of the bank, too. The mill in Honor started in 1895 and petered out about 1915. Honor didn't have exclusive rights to big piles of logs, so this is from Cedar. Not everybody in the lumber industry worked in the woods. The mills had crews, and just because they were in town, that didn't mean that it was safe. They would have a steam boiler that powered the machinery until electricity came along in 1915. This group was in Nesson City, and a lot of thumbs were lost, and there's a lot of accidents. But it was a good job, and you could stay in town. Here's another view. In this image, you can see more buildings than are currently in Nesson City today. No. It's a neat image from this sawmill. All the guys are sitting on, they had a feed. They had a chain drive that would feed it from the water usually. And these guys are sitting on that part. Would go into the mill, then it would get sawn, and then they would stack it on the other side. Look closely at the background, you can see that there are 0 trees on the hill. This is taken at the Habler Mill in Lake Ann. So it wasn't just all logs and lumber. In Homestead Township, at the corner of Cinder and Thompsonville Road, essentially, there was a plant called the Desmond Chemical Plant. And it took hardwood, cordwood, and it burned it into charcoal. And then they sold the charcoal, but they advanced on this and then captured the chemicals that came off the wood when it was being converted into charcoal. And they had it timed really well because World War I happened, and they got wood alcohol out of this, which was a component of gunpowder at the time. So the Desmond Chemical Plant, for part of that decade, was the just deployed in the county. Here's some cordwood. They brought cordwood as far as Lake Ann, And they used men with teams of horses to bring it in. They also used early automobiles to bring it in. They also had a contraption called the steam hauler, which had a caterpillar drive or tracked wheels. They would take that cordwood, and behind these guys here, these massive horses are Percherons. They're ideal for moving the loads. You can see that there's on the ground, and they would put these sleds into this kiln, a retort kiln, and then it would burn, and it would take a while. And then they'd pull the charcoal out. Very dirty. I'm gonna guess it wasn't the best work environment for your health. That's an example of a retort, the retort kiln. Desmond Chemical Company was active from about 1908 to 1920, and then they moved to the UP, to Manistee, because they ran out of wood. These pictures are great because the swagger of these guys is fantastic. And they lived in this. These are tar paper shacks. And there were so many people living at Carter Siding. We just recently went through some school records, and 2 teachers had 100 kids in their class. Those 3 kids may have been part of that. You can see the tar paper shacks. You can see an early gasoline distribution site there. And they had their own hotel. It was kind of like a boarding house. And that was right on Thompsonville Road. Again, with the standing on things. And the arrow points to a building, and that's the store of the Desmond Chemical Company. And it was known for being very well supplied. They could get lots of food and things that other parts of the county weren't able to get. A guy named Berga Lindy operated it, and he later became a probate judge out of Thompsonville. And he was interviewed for the Daylight in the Swamp. So this is how much cordwood they would use, or a vantage point. And this wood yard caught fire several times. So they really didn't convert everything they brought in. And the fires were a big problem because this was later in the times when they were cutting down the woods. So first they would cut down the trees, and then they cut down all the smaller trees and used them for cordwood. So then there was just the slash that covered everything. And so fires, when they had a bunch of steam equipment operating during this time, locomotives throwing cinders around, guys smoking, not thinking about it. There were a lot of fires that happened, and the fires would get so hot, they would kill the humus in the soil. So there's a biological aspect of soil, and the fires would kill that, and it would take a while for the soil to become usable again. Here's another view. The Desmond Chemical Plant was on the Paramarquette Railroad. They built a siding off of the regular line, and Senate siding. Also almost made an arm that went this way, and later became the Empire and Southeastern Railroad, which terminated in Empire. So this building that's tall on the left, for distillation, you have to heat the contents to various temperatures, and then the substances would come out at a certain temperature, and then you would sort it based on that. So you need a height to do that. Food. This gentleman is holding a large horn. This is Gabriel's horn, as they called it. We would call the men in. This is a particularly nice dining hall. Here's another view. They have these before pictures. I haven't seen an after picture from these guys eating. This is a picture of honor. They have some very large logs, large diameter logs here. Again, there's a man wearing a fabulous fur coat. And above him is an early light bulb. Thompsonville was the first town in Benzie County to have electricity. They used a coal-powered plant. And they were known for leaving their lights on day and night because they did not understand about conservation of energy. So this is the LaRue House. It was built by Lawrence Crane. Lawrence Crane was an immigrant, Irish immigrant, came here in 1848 and became the richest person in Alberta. He was known to be able to look inside a log and see exactly how many square feet of timber was in it. He didn't not only built this house, but he also built the house next to it, which is a white house. This is the Crane. In the center of the image, there's a man wearing a hat at a jaunty angle, and to the left of him is a man with a beard. I believe that's Lawrence Crane. Crane was important because he not only built the mills in Alberta, 3 of them, he built 5 other mills in Benzie County. And before that, he was the supervisor of the Butler Mill, and he also worked in Muskegon and Saginaw. He was well-traveled. So this is a form of recreation, I guess. They seem to be having a really good time. And that's it. Does anybody have any questions? How did they get the logs on top of the log decks? So they would have 2 pieces of timber, and then they would roll it up and they would pull it up, and manpower and elbow grease. Oh, they were proud to all land pictures. Yeah. Thank you very much.
All right, let's give Andy another round of applause, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank all of you for joining us here this evening. And thank you for everyone who was on Zoom to watch. We greatly appreciate your support. As a reminder, our next Benzonia Academy Lecture Series will be on Thursday, October 12th, here at the Mills Community House with our very own volunteers, Steve Veach and Sherry Dundon, presenting 1906, A Summer to Remember. Donated historical photos bring a family to life. Another reminder is that the Benzie Area Historical Museum is open Tuesday, Wednesday, and Saturday from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we'll be hosting our annual meeting here at the Mills Community House on Thursday, September 21st, so next week, at 7 p.m. with a reception starting at 6:30. And we will be having our last headstone cleaning session this Sunday, September 17th at 2 p.m. at the Weldon Township Cemetery. You can check out our website, benziemuseum.org, for other events and happenings with the Benzie Area Historical Society. And lastly, if you've not done so already, please consider leaving a donation, as we do rely entirely on donations, and that is what helps us in our preservation work. Also helps us keep lights on there at the museum. Again, thank you all so very much for joining us here this evening, and we hope to see you again real soon.